one and all, my name is John Clare, this is John's Dark Art, and as always, you are very welcome. Now, today's piece I want to talk about is a piece I call Heracles and the Nemean Lion. The reason being is because I was listening to a lot of Greek mythology as told by the wonderful Stephen Fry in his audiobooks. He has a trilogy of them, by the way, which I can thoroughly recommend, which are called Heroes and Troy. Check them out, definitely recommend. So that proved an inspiration for this. Basically, the skull, it depicts Heracles, not Hercules, because Heracles is the original Greek and it actually means the glory of Hera. There's a whole thing about it, read the book, check it out. And the Nemean lion being his most famous of his 12 labours, where he kills a giant lion with impenetrable skin. That's the piece. I'll bring it up for you now so you can have a look. Happy? Good? Excellent. Because now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the creation of the piece, how I did it and whatnot, jump into Procreate, show you how it's done, and we're going to do that now. Okay, so here we are. We are in Procreate. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to go into my finished work folder. I'm going to scroll down a little bit and I'm going to bring up Heracles and the Nemean. And this is the piece here. So what we'll do first and foremost, as we are usually want to do, we're going to go into our canvas information. And track time was 28 hours on the button. And total strokes made were 11,980. So as you can probably imagine, this is one of the more involved pieces that I did. And even at 28 hours, that's still quite a chunk of time. I think it took me a couple of weeks to do this when you divide that time over a period of time. Anyway, so we'll go into video, we'll go into time lapse replay, and here we are. Right, so we'll bring it out a little bit so you can see what's going on. Okay, so this is the start of it here now. Me roughing out the lion, and again, this is where, like, I know I've said this before, but this is probably where, like, me roughing things out comes in useful, because nothing is 100% committed at this stage. So if I do change the size, because the thing is, I only discovered this relatively recently, but to give you an example, all right, so we still have the layers on this piece. So what we can do, if we go to select and we go to, if we go to the arrow, now there's three ways you can got nearest neighbor, bilinear, bicubic. I only found this out recently via Instagram. Apparently this is in terms of like zooming in and out when you want to resize bits and pieces, this actually is the one where, okay, so if we select that, this is the one where that preserves the most detail when you're zooming in and out. So, because the one weakness about using pixels rather than vectors is, although you get more detail with pixels than you do with vectors, there's always an issue with, like, the loss of quality when you're pinching in and pinching out when you're resizing objects, especially with the kind of drawings that I do. I like to make sure my details are crisp and my lines are crisp. So this is actually a good way of circumventing that. But even then, I'd still try and avoid doing it as much as possible with something that you're pretty much final about. Whereas if you're doing it at the start when you're not as committed, when your lines are a bit rougher, then it's not so much of a problem really. But it can be a problem once you've committed, once you put the work in, that if you want to resize it later, it could and maybe will impair the quality of the image depending on the size of the canvas that you're using, depending on the pixel density that you're using. All these can be factors in. So if you are using Procreate, try and keep it on bicubic if you want to scale images for any reason. Okay, so let's go back into the time-lapse replay. And we'll punch in a little, we'll move it on a little bit. So this is me. So yeah, I've kind of roughed out, I'm happy with it. And now I'm kind of happy with its composition. So now I'm committing, now I'm adding the details. So I'll punch in a little bit so you can see what's going on. So again, cross hatching, building up my tone. Also, I like moving things around. Another great thing about digital art, this is why I advocate for it so much, is like details like this here, right? This little kind of hole in the skull to allow for blood vessels or whatever. If it's not in the right place, or you don't feel it's in the right place and you need to move it, you can literally just select it using the selection tool, and then move it to where you need it to be. This is the thing about, you know, obviously with time lapses, it doesn't really show you the length of time it takes to do these drawings, but there is a lot of work involved in a lot of what I'm doing here. And the main reason for it is just because I want my drawings to look good. So if you've got the time, take your time. Also, like when I was drawing the teeth out here, well, I mean, as you can tell initially, they were very roughly sketched in just for placement. But then when I came back later to kind of finalise it, and I wanted to kind of position the teeth so they were relatively adjacent to each other, I mean, what I do is I use these lines here that I kind of that I drew in to make sure everything was parallel, move things around so it looked good, and then again select, and then, you know, move to where you need them to be, and just shading out all the details. See, this is the thing. This is where I'm at my happiest, to be honest. Like, I know it sounds ridiculous, but I've mentioned previously in videos about the state of flow. The times when it's not so much when I notice it, but when I notice it in hindsight, especially when I'm doing these kind of demonstrations, is that I can remember back to when I'm drawing these areas, and these are the bits that I kind of lose myself in. It's all of a sudden, you know, you kind of lose yourself in the details almost. And it's probably like the most satisfying part to draw for me, to make sure like there is that kind of contrast and everything does look convincing and everything does look as it should do. Same thing here, a little bit of resizing on the lower jaw, because I'm trying to draw a human, not a bloody monkey. I've roughed out the drawing quite large with rougher lines, and then once I was happier with everything, before I committed, I was like, okay, better move it down here. So I did, and then I could focus on the details. So if you punch in a little bit, and you can see that I'm kind of, you know, cross-hatching, going backwards and forwards, because that's another thing that I find quite useful, is like going backwards and forwards, like not just like staying in one particular area, but adding tone to one area, then coming back and adding tone to another area. It's a good way of kind of judging whether or not you're getting your contrasts and your highlights correct. But if you lose yourself in one area for too long, I'd say, what ends up happening is like you focus on one area at the cost of everything else. So the best thing to do is kind of move around the drawing a little bit and allow yourself to move around the drawing so you can judge the contrast as you're doing it. But don't get me wrong, when it comes to things like teeth, you do kind of, you know, the finickier areas of the drawing, yeah, you do need to kind of focus in on them more. But in more broader areas, like the back of the skull, around the orbits of the eye, the lower jaws, the bigger shapes, shall we say, then yeah, it's a good idea to kind of move around a little bit. And there we go. And that was Heracles and the Nemean. So let's round this out now, shall we? Okay, so that was Heracles and the Nemean. Again, this piece I'm quite happy with. I'm relatively proud of it. Relatively, because, you know, me being the artist, I mean, I'm always my harshest critic. So for me to turn around and say I'm relatively happy with it, I think it means it's okay. It's not too bad, in my view at least anyway. So as per usual, if you're interested, we're putting this up for sale on the website www.johnsdarkart.com. Two sizes as per usual. A3, that'll be at €75, and A4, that'll be at €45. So if you'd like to support us and what we do, please head over to the website, check out what we're doing, and if you like my art, please pick one up. Thank you very much. So in terms of doing this piece and the inspirations behind it, you know, this was a piece that was, as I said before, inspired by the retelling of Greek mythology by the wonderful Stephen Fry, a man who I think is amazing and is a national treasure for the UK at least anyway, and, you know, Americans and the rest of Europe, you can admire him as well, you know, you're perfectly allowed to. But yeah, I mean, the one thing I like doing, especially when I'm drawing, like a lot of people will listen to music, and I do that too. I'll quite often put my headphones on and listen to various tunes that I'm partial to. Unfortunately, because this being YouTube, I can't demonstrate that because copyright. But what I will also do is I'll use, this isn't a sponsorship because obviously we don't have this kind of audience yet, but you know, I listen to Audible and I have a pretty sizable collection of books on there at the moment. And included in that list is the trilogy of Greek books written by Stephen Fry. And because he also narrates the books, it adds a little bit of magic to it, I think, because you can tell the man has a real love and fascination with Greek myth. And I think it's because, you know, these are stories that have been told for, at this stage, thousands of years. I mean, this is the bedrock of the storytelling of Western Europe, you know, as well as Norse mythology and to a lesser extent maybe like Celtic and Irish mythologies. And I don't mean that disparagingly, because, you know, as someone of Irish descent, both my parents are Irish and I'm very proud of my heritage and I live in the country. Unfortunately, like a lot of those stories that I'm not as familiar with them as I feel I should be, and it's something that hopefully at some point I will rectify. At the end of the day, I mean, like, artists have been inspired by myth and legend for, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years, whether it's the stories of the Bible. Again, my favorite artist is the wonderful, if not somewhat psychotic, Caravaggio, and his retellings of biblical stories, whether they be the taking of the Christ, whether it be the crucifixion of St. Peter, whether it be Judith and Holofernes, a particularly savage piece recreated by the amazing female artist Artemisia Gentileschi, who I believe was a student of Caravaggio's. You know, we're always retelling these stories and retelling these myths, and I find that fascinating. We're all, you know, there's always we're always reinterpreting, we're always drawing from this same well, and it's amazing how many ways they can be retold. It's amazing how many ways they can be redepicted, or, you know, like whether it be through opera, whether it be through art, whether it be just through novels or whatever, or comic books. I mean, look at it this way, like the biggest franchise in film. I mean, if you watch our post-watch post-mortem, you realise I am quite critical of Marvel movies these days. Not because I dislike them, it's just because I feel there's been a deterioration in the quality, unfortunately. But one of their primary characters is Thor, the god of thunder. And that is a complete retelling from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby right back in the 1960s to the present day of the original Norse sagas. You know, and I think that that's a wonderful thing that we're able to keep these myths and these stories alive. And I think it's something we should keep doing, you know. Just because a story's been told before doesn't mean it's not worth retelling. Not only that, we can also take our own meanings from art, you know. Maybe it's telling one story but communicating something else, or sometimes you as the viewer will take something completely different from me. I mean, I don't anticipate, unless you know, look at the title or you hear me talking about it, that you will necessarily derive that this is based on Greek mythology, any more than, say, if I show you another piece of mine, Cerberus 1, three-headed hyenas. This is so a three-headed hyena is my retelling or reimagining of the Cerberus, the guardian of Hades, the Greek hell. So, you know, I think that as a creative, you know, in a previous video, I said that what you need to do is you need to develop a wellspring of influences, and hopefully this is demonstrating, that you, the viewer, whether you're starting out in art or you're an experienced artist, it demonstrates that you can not only like tell a story or depict a story in a completely different way, but you can also put something of yourself into it. You can modify it, you can recreate it, you can retell that story in your own way. I mean, once upon a time, that's how we told stories. We didn't always write our stories down. I mean, the oldest written myth and story is the Epic of Gilgamesh. But once upon a time, that story would have been told maybe another 1,000 or 2 years beforehand. It was only after a period of time when we learned how to write and use things called styli to etch into clay our stories, that those were then kind of formalized, so to speak. Same with, I believe it was Herodotus who wrote down who was one of the original, no, it was Homer. Was it Homer? It was some Greek dude anyway. It was Roman? Was it? Homer? Homer, like, obviously so. Can you understand why I work with this man? Anyway, yeah, that's the thing. It's like, yeah, the fact that we're yes, these stories are formalized, but that doesn't necessarily mean they can't still be reinterpreted and retold. And I think as an artist, it's a wonderful wellspring to draw from, and I encourage other people to do it if you're not doing it already, which, you know, I'm pretty sure you are, because if you're anything like me, how did I get started? I started by drawing comic books, or redrawing pages of comic books, splash pages and whatever else. That's how I got started, and I imagine that's how a lot of modern artists got started. So develop that wellspring and draw from it readily and greedily, and make as much art as you can from it, whether you're writing music, whether you're writing a novel, whether you're drawing, whether you're painting, whatever it is you're doing, keep drawing from it, keep creating art, share it with the world in whatever way you see fit. My name's been John Clare, this has been John's Dark Art, and as always, you are very welcome. Till next time.